All right, this lecture recording is the first one for Chapter 2, which is Operations Strategy in a Global Environment. Our learning objectives for Chapter 2 are to discuss the 6 reasons to globalize operations. We're going to define mission and strategy in some later videos, as well as identify and explain the 3 strategic approaches to a competitive advantage, customer and competitive priorities, identifying the 4 global operations strategies, and then we are going to calculate out how to do the factor rating, which helps us to pick outsourced providers or vendors or even give them a report card. And then lastly, we will determine how to use the value of a loyal customer model. So these are all the things that we're going to learn in Chapter 2 together, which is operations strategy in a global environment. So this chapter, Chapter 2, when we talk about global operations and strategy, this one is going to have the most references to global operations, talking about why we do business overseas, why it's important to have global supply chains. And, as time has gone on more and more, our world and our businesses have become more and more globalized. Shipping routes have gotten faster and reduced. Technology is helping people to communicate throughout the world at any given time, and any given day. And then our global supply chains are becoming less and less, there's not as many steps in the way. They're becoming more and more streamlined. And so being able to do global business is just getting easier and easier to do. If you think back to how things were 20, 30, 40 years ago, everything we bought was from someone, generally not only in America, but someone in the same geographic region. So if you were buying a silk-screened t-shirt, you'd buy it from someone down the street, or if you had someone who was going to help you build some kind of product or furniture, they were generally relatively close to where you were located. Now, nothing it doesn't matter where products are built. If I was going to get a silk-screened t-shirt made for me, I would buy it on the internet, and I have no idea where that manufacturing facility would be. I guarantee that the majority of the products that I have sitting in this office or in my home came from other parts of the world. So globalization is an increasing trend and will only continue to do so on a year-over-year basis. So when we, to back up that point here, if we look at the growth of world trade as a percentage of GDP, it continues to go up and up over the years. When I started my career in about 2000, we were doing some international business, but the percentage was single digits and it was small. And as time went on, not only was it double digits, but it became a significant portion of not only who we sold to, but also who we bought from. So this has just continued to, become a bigger trend within America. We are importing more goods, and we are also, we are exporting more too. Don't get me wrong there. But as we know, that trade gap is getting bigger and bigger. We are importing more products than we are exporting, and so you can see. That trend has just continued to go on over the course of the last many decades. So globalization, increasingly firms find their customers and suppliers, they're located all around the world. This is the result of that growth of world trade. In response, organizations are extending their distribution channels and supply chains globally, and firms compete not only with their own expertise, but with talent within the global supply chain. And again, if there was ever an example of how supply chains are competing against each other globally, the last couple of years of the coronavirus pandemic have showed us that our supply chains are delicate. They are definitely competing with each other. And when you see a shortage in one area, it has a domino effect into shortages in other areas as well. So in this, for the next few slides, we're going to talk about reasons to globalize, the reasons to globalize. And the book brings up 6 very good reasons to globalize: improving the supply chain, reducing costs, improving operations, understanding markets, improving our products, and attracting and retaining global talent. This is not the only reasons to globalize. There are other reasons to globalize as well. That could be to help reduce risk to national or seasonal variations of the products that we grow or that we sell. It can also help us to expand the product life cycle, therefore increasing and extending sales. And there's lots of other reasons that we want to globalize. But these are the 6 main reasons for globalizing operations. So the first one is to improve the supply chain. Okay, improve the supply chain. This does not say to reduce costs within the supply chain. That's the next reason to globalize that we'll talk about in just a second here. By improving the supply chain, we want to get our talent, so our people, and our raw materials closer to the source of where there's the best expertise and the best unique resources. So a couple examples of what that could look like would be, if you're a perfume manufacturer, you're probably going to have some of your fragrances and the different flowers that you're growing to make these perfumes or essential oils in places of the world where they're really known to have rich soil and good weather that supports these kinds of flowers and oils. So that would be like the Mediterranean, right? If you're a perfume manufacturer, maybe you go to France. Maybe you don't grow lavender in Phoenix or Yuma or Tucson or something like that, where you're gonna have a different kind of plant because of that geography. Same thing for athletic shoes. The book, I believe, brings up this story where there's this one very small town in China that has 50,000 people, and 50,000 people build shoes. Okay, that's their unique expertise. Other examples you can think of would be, San Jose for their technology expertise. So we globalize to improve our supply chain by getting our people near the talent and our raw materials near where the things are grown that have the best geography to support those products. So that's improving our supply chain. Another reason to globalize, and this is what people think of most, is reducing our costs. Okay, reducing supply chain costs and operational costs as well. So foreign locations with lower wage rates can lower direct and indirect costs. I mean, if you think about how much employees are paid in California versus how much they're paid in Tijuana, and we're only 30 minutes apart, there's a dramatic difference there between the labor rate for manufacturing facilities in those two cities, and we border each other. So if you're a large organization and you have a large manufacturing facility, you can save millions and millions of dollars by just moving your operations an hour south. Because those foreign labor rates are going to be lower. When we think about globalization and reducing costs, there are lots of different trade organizations and agreements in place, and I'm not going to go over all of them today between the World Trade Organization and the EU and NAFTA and those. I'll go over a couple of those in the next couple slides. But there are lots of things in place to ensure that global trade is being done ethically, that there are fair trade practices in place, and so these are to help us in our effort to globalize ethically. There's two things I'd like to bring up in regards to reducing costs. I touched upon it just a second ago with moving your operations down to Tijuana per se. But maquiladoras. Maquiladoras are foreign-owned assembly plants in Mexico. Companies import machinery and materials duty-free and export finished products around the world. The only taxes that they pay are on the value that is added to that product, so it's a very small value-added tax. And there's a lot of these on the border towns between America and Mexico. I have been to a couple myself down in Tecate, Mexico. I went to a power supply manufacturer down there, and it felt like a whole different world being just an hour away. Seeing a manufacturing facility in Tecate versus the manufacturing facilities that I was used to here in San Diego. But we did a lot of business with them, and they were part of our organization. And so we owned them per se, but they were manufacturing our products on just right there, right across the border. So I was only 5 minutes away from a manufacturing facility. So that's maquiladora, a lot of garment assembly, textiles, electronic assemblies, things like that. That are manufactured in maquiladoras. Okay, next is NAFTA. It's important to understand what NAFTA is. NAFTA is now called the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. Not a very clever name there, but NAFTA is now the USMCA, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. And this has really been a major driver for American trade for nearly 2 decades. The unions in America don't love NAFTA because they feel that it unfairly made a lot of trade go to either Mexico or Canada, and that we lost something like 700,000 American manufacturing jobs because of it. But in the same light, we can look at all the improvements that NAFTA incorporated, and we believe that we were now exporting $1.2 trillion worth of United States goods that were produced into Canada and Mexico because of NAFTA. So, with every good, there's sometimes a little bit of bad, and so although NAFTA has been great for exporting some of our products to Canada and Mexico, it's also to blame for potentially a reasonable amount of lost jobs. Okay, so the next reason, the third reason to globalize, is to improve our operations. And internationalization provides access to great ideas all around the world, helping us to get that free flow of ideas, because not all great ideas come from one place. And so understanding the differences between how business is handled in other countries, the expertise that they have, it can really help us to improve our operations. So a couple examples would be a lot of the major American experts that we talked about briefly in Chapter 1 during the historical evolution of operations management. A lot of those folks were trained in Japan because that's where they really understood Lean, Six Sigma, and inventory management practices. A lot of American companies have spent time in Scandinavia to help understand how to do proper economics, or ergonomics, I should say, and really what works and what works well for building an ergonomic product. So really globalizing can help us to improve our operations. One other very prudent reason to globalize, to improve our operations, is to get a faster response time and customer service. So if you're an organization and half of the products that you ship are in Europe, it would probably make sense to have a service center or some kind of facility in Europe to where every time there was a problem with the product, they didn't have to ship it back to America for repairs. They would have something locally there to have a faster turnaround time for those customer service issues. And so that would be an example of improving operations globally by having facilities close to your end customers to really improve that response time. Okay, the next reason to globalize would be to understand markets. Interacting with foreign customers and suppliers can lead to new opportunities. It can help us to extend the product life cycle. And when we talk about extending the product life cycle, maturing products that might not be technologically or ergonomically top of the line in a country like America, there are far other countries that would be perfectly happy with that, a little bit of outdated technology or furniture or equipment, and that would be perfectly acceptable for their standards. So we can sell maturing products into less developed countries. And then another reason to globalize is, for understanding markets. I one time heard a story from, I was there listening to the CEO of Nixon, and so I always wear a Nixon watch for this lecture. But he was talking about that they didn't understand the markets they were in. They were trying to move in selling their products into Europe, and they had received feedback that the individuals out there liked the looks of the products. They said, we think they look good, and sure, I'd buy that watch, but they weren't selling. And so he said that they just didn't understand the European market, that because they went in with the price point very similar to what they were doing in America of $150 or $200 per watch, that all they had to do was double their price, and then those same exact watches started selling better in Europe because the perceived quality was then higher by having that higher price. So they didn't understand the markets they were going into, and so and that's because they don't have a presence in Europe, right? They only have a presence here in San Diego, and so they didn't understand that market because they weren't there. And so that was a lesson learned for them. All right, and then the next reason to globalize is to improve products. So improving products is not the same as understanding those markets, improving our products. So Nixon didn't change their watches at all by globalizing or trying to sell their products in Europe. They didn't change them. In this example, we are changing our products and we are improving our products because it's not a one-size-fits-all. If many different geographies, those local customers are going to have different desires, tastes, and so by being close to your end customers, you'll understand those local customs, cultures, tastes, sensibilities, so that you can design products that are more in line with the geography that you're selling into. I mean, even things like Coca-Cola, they have a different taste in different countries because they like it sweeter in Mexico, right? So they use real sugar versus fake sugar. And there's lots of other things that you can do to make sure that your products will sell in other countries, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. We have different tastes, we have different desires, we have different customs, and so you've got to change your products to match the markets that you're in. Next would be to attract and retain global talent. Okay, so that's a key reason to globalize. And not only for the employee, but for the organization as well. So by being a global organization, you're going to have better employment opportunities. You're going to have diversity. Diversity is a really good thing to have on teams, because then you don't have people who all have the same style. They don't all have the same education. They don't all have the same backgrounds and perspective. I've got a relatively small team right now, about 20 folks. And on that team, I've intentionally hired diversity because all of our clients are different. So if I have everyone who acts like me and speaks like me and looks like me, that's not going to work for our clients. But having diverse employees, I can match up with who our clientele are. And so not only just matching up with our clientele, but various folks who have different backgrounds and both educationally and geographically, they're going to bring a unique point of view that can help enrich the organization, help us to be smarter, have new ideas. And so having diversity and global talent is very relevant to organizational success, especially if you're a global company. You've got to be able to understand the markets that you're in. Okay, so now those were the 6 reasons for globalization. Okay, those are 6 key reasons why we would want to globalize, and those are all kind of some of the pros of globalization. But there's also some concerns, and there's some cons of globalization as well. They are cultural, they're ethical, because cultures can be very, very different than what you're used to, especially if you've only lived in one area for the majority of your life. So attitudes can be very different towards punctuality, child labor, intellectual property, thievery, bribery, things like that. So these are all things that you need to take into consideration if you're going to do global operations. Let's just take punctuality, for example. If I'm saying a meeting starts at 7 a.m., that meeting starts at 7 a.m. It doesn't start at 7:10. It doesn't start at 7:15. And that's different in other parts of the world. If you say 7 o'clock, they mean 7:15. So punctuality, you have to take that into consideration. Child labor. In America, we've got very strict laws about which children can work and what age that is. And in other countries, it's a little bit more loose. Sometimes parents bring their children to work with them because they need the extra hands to get the job done. And other areas, it's just a much, much lower working age. And so you have to understand what those ages are, and if you're okay with that if you do global operations. Whether it's thievery or bribery or corruption, these are all things to take into consideration as well. There are parts of the world where bribery is just a normal part of doing business. And then there's other parts of the world where taking shortcuts on quality is also more tolerated and accepted. And I've got some funny stories about that from my manufacturing days, going all over the world to look for companies that could sell our products. And I won't tell the stories today, but you just have to know what you're getting yourself into if you're going to do global operations, especially with your global supply chain, because you can't trust what you see on the internet. You can't even sometimes trust the in-person tours of facilities that you get. You've got to really know your sources and make sure that you're picking out high-quality vendors if you're going to do global operations. And same thing for if you're going to do business overseas. You want to make sure that you're picking a place that you are okay with their cultural and ethical differences than maybe that you are used to. This is a chart that I like to pull. This is from Transparency International. They rank every country. I think there's 175 of them on a score of 1 to 100. They do this score. They update this every year. You can see that yellow is good and bright red is bad. So you can see Somalia, North Korea. Some of these countries are pretty corrupt. It changes every year. I think last year North Korea had the worst corruption score, and this is not Brent. I didn't make up these rankings, so don't get mad at me for pointing this out. This is Transparency International. You can see that South Africa, Russia, there's a lot of red there. America's kind of orangish. and over the last 5 to 10-ish years, we've ranked somewhere in the top 20. I think the best ranking that I've seen was 13th, and we just recently slipped out of the top 20, but we're generally right there, around 17, 18, 19 in the world. So, top 10% for scores for doing business, ethical business, and not a whole lot of corruption. The top 10 countries are usually in Europe. You can see if you look closely, there's a lot of yellow and orange in that region. All right, and then globalization considerations for companies. One last thing to think through. If you're going to do global operations or global supply chains, you're going to need to review some of the following to make sure that, let's say you're manufacturing printed circuit board assemblies, and the individuals who are building those products need to understand how to read electronical drawings. Well, therefore, you've got to have a high literacy rate in that country. It might not matter if you're doing mining or something like that, but if you're doing technical work, then the literacy rate needs to be high. This list has a lot of things that you need to think through, whether it's the work ethic or interest rates or even number of miles on the highway. If you're building products that are fragile or very technical in nature, you're not going to want to put them on a truck that's bouncing all over the place on dirt roads, right? You want them to have good paved freeways and things like that. So all of these little things you're going to need to think through as you consider doing global operations, whether it's putting a manufacturing facility somewhere around the world, or whether or not you're going to be picking a vendor to do business with who is global, international as well. So these are all things to consider prior to doing international business. All right, so that sums up our first lecture recording for Chapter 2, Global Operations and Strategy. We went over the 6 reasons to globalize, and then a couple of the concerns with globalization as well. In our next video, we're going to be doing an exercise called Rating Outsource Providers.